לא עוצר בילדה, אני חש את הרוח נושם, וניגש לחלקי ולבקש בקשה, ועולה בתפילה.
Just put it the wrong way. No, take the other leg. There's two legs. The other side. That's it.
יש לי רגע של שלווה שיוצא מן השיבה, ששוב מזכיר לי את שכל כך נהיר לי, רק עוד כמה דקות
I was looking for inspiration song.
אני חשת הרוח נושם וניגש לחלקי ולשלם ולבקש בקשה והולך בתפילה התגעגעת
Good afternoon and welcome back after a few days of a holiday. And now we're finished with Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres. And now we're starting Shabbos Bereshis. We're beginning now the book of Genesis once again from the beginning. As I start my class today, I want to remind you that now we're back on schedule as we're going to, not too many holidays interrupting, so we're not going to have so many discussions about the holidays. So therefore, if anybody has any suggestions of what they would like the class to be on every lunch break, if you have any questions that would like to be addressed, we will be taking suggestions from our viewers, as you want to call it, to if anybody has any suggestions of what they would like to discuss in the upcoming lunch breaks. We will every single week be discussing the weekly Torah reading, but as you know, there are 5 days of the week that we have this lunch break. So if there's anything else or any other questions or topics that you would like to discuss, or if anybody has any questions, please email and message me about them, and we will, God willing, discuss them in the upcoming lunch break classes. So starting from today, you have your chance to put your input and send your questions, comments, suggestions of what you would like lunch break, what we would like to discuss. If it's a subject that we can discuss, and everybody and the broader audience can appreciate these discussions. Of course, every Thursday and Friday, we will have the Torah reading of the week, but otherwise there will be random topics that people suggest or ask questions about, and that's what we are going to discuss. Today, being that we're coming from the holiday of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, and we now began the book of Genesis, today we will discuss the first verse in the book of Genesis. The first verse in the book of Genesis is action-packed, as you can imagine. God begins the Torah, and the first words of the Torah begin with Bereshis bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. And Rashi was the foremost commentator on the Torah. It's a simple interpretation, looks to give us the exact or interpretation that a 5-year-old would ask. And Rashi asks a question. What is the Torah? Is the Torah a history book? Absolutely not. The Torah is not here to tell us a story about what happened in the creation of the world. The Torah, as we know as the words, is a lesson for life. Torah, the word Torah means Torah, which means a lesson. Why then does the Torah begin with the words, God created the heaven and earth? How is that a lesson for life? What do we learn from that? How does that apply to us in our day-to-day life? And therefore Rashi says and asks the obvious question, if Torah was all about laws teaching to the Jewish people, the Torah should have began with the first commandment given to the Jews as the Jewish people, which was that the Jewish calendar goes according to the moon, which was given in the book of Exodus while the Jewish people were in the land of Egypt. God then gave them the first commandment, and he told them, look out at the moon. The moon is what you would know. This is how you see the beginning of the month. And based on according to that is what every Jewish calendar goes according to. Until today, we follow the lunar calendar. And that's how all the holidays and months are set according to that. That should have been the first mitzvah. Why then does the Torah begin with the mitzvah of Bereshis bara Elikim, God created heaven and the earth? What commandment does it have in it? What does it teach us for today's day and age? And over here, the commentaries explain, and Rashi continues to say the following thing. And he says, because Koyach Maisav Yigid Lama, he wanted to tell the nations of the world the greatness of God. And therefore, he says, it might come a time later on in generations that the nations of the world are going to come along and say, hey, the land of Israel doesn't belong to you. Who gave it to you? How did you get it? And therefore, God comes along and says, I created the heaven and earth, and I was the one that gave this land to the Jewish people. Now, the obvious question over here is, this is a very fascinating fact, that God should begin the beginning of his Torah, of his eternal wisdom, begin it with a mitzvah because he's worried about what the nations of the world are going to say. Not only that, the very fact that God is beginning it with such a verse gives room for them to have such an argument. Why then does it even have such an argument? What's the reason for such an argument? Seemingly speaking, every obvious person would see the way the world is. You conquer a land, the land belongs to you. The Jewish people conquered the land from the Canaanites, and it belongs to them. Why should there be any questions? Furthermore, when Noah split up the land, when Noah survived the flood with his family, as we're going to read about it next week, Noah split up the land, and every single section was given to another one of his 3 children. The section of the land of Israel was given to one of his children named Shem, who is the great-grandfather of Abraham, who is the great-grandfather of the Jewish people. So, logistically speaking, by the very fact that we waged war and we got it to belong to us, and even inheritance speaking, it was given to Noah, who gave it to Shem, who then gave it to Abraham. It should be ours as well. So what's over here the argument that God is refuting by starting the book of Genesis by saying that he created the heaven and earth? And the argument is a little deeper. The nations of the world obviously know and understand that when you conquer a land, it belongs to you. But exactly that is their question. The same way you conquer a land and it belongs to you, what if another country comes and conquers it from you? Then they get it. But what's the difference with the land of Israel? The difference with the land of Israel is that once we conquer the land of Israel belongs to us for eternity. Now, how is that possible? How is it possible that the land of Israel should belong to the Jewish people for eternity? How is it possible that even after 2,000 years that we've been exiled from our land, the land of Israel still belongs to every single Jew, even those that don't live there? How is that possible? Therefore, they come along and say, you're thieves. You stole it. You took it. Technically speaking, the land of Israel should have the same rules that every other country has. You conquer it, you won it, it's now yours. Once you leave, it's no longer yours. The Jewish people left, they were exiled from their land. The Nebuchadnezzar in his time, Titus in his time, and every generation, wherever it may be, fought the Jewish people, exiled them from their land. Why does it still belong to them? How do the Jewish people still have a claim to it? And over here is what the Torah begins the book of Genesis with. God begins the book of Genesis and saying, this is the concept of Jewish people. This is the recipe of the ingredient of what the Jewish people are all about. The Jewish people are a people of eternity. The Jewish people have a power to take something, and it doesn't just become theirs temporarily. But because I created the heaven and earth, and I have given the power to the Jewish people to conquer the land of Israel. Therefore, when they conquered the land of Israel, it wasn't just like every other country. It was theirs for eternity. I gave it to them, and it became their eternal inheritance that nobody can ever take it away. And this is what the Torah begins with in telling us the generations from when God created heaven and earth, all the way until the Jewish people ended up in the land of Egypt, to tell us what is the lesson for the eternity of the Jewish people. How do the Jewish people have this ability to be an eternal nation? Is because they have an eternal Torah, an eternal God, and an eternal land. The Jewish people, the Torah, and God are, as the Zohar says, one knot, intertwined with one another. You can't separate them. And God begins the Torah by saying, Bereshis bara Elikim, I have created heaven and earth. I have given to the Jewish people the Torah. I have given them the land of Israel. And the same way I am eternal, and the Torah is eternal, the Jewish people are eternal, and the land of Israel is the Jewish people's for eternity. It does not have the rules like every other country. This land of Israel is theirs regardless of where they are. That even a Jew that wakes up in Timbuktu that's only a day old, he belongs to the land of Israel belongs to him. Every single Jew, regardless of where they are in the universe, the land of Israel belongs to them. This is all encrypted in the first verse. Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. This same God who created heaven and earth, this God that's eternal and infinite, is a nation of Jewish people that created them, gave them and blessed them, and will continue to bless them. That we will once again merit and see how the land of Israel is the eternal gift of the Jewish people. The land of Israel and the Torah are the eternal gift of the Jewish people. And when we adhere to the precepts of the Torah and recognize that God is the eternal God of the universe, then we will see that the gift, the land of Israel, is ours for eternity as well. And the dominionship of the land of Israel will continue to be under the Jewish people, and we will once again be able to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash where it may be now. Again, I'm putting it out there that we will be discussing the Torah reading for this week as of now. But also, please, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions of what you want this lunch break, what you would like us to discuss during lunch break, please feel free to put it in the comments, or better yet, email me your questions and suggestions, and we will discuss them in our further lunch breaks. So join us again tomorrow, lunch break with the Rabbi at 1 p.m. God bless you and have a wonderful day. Enjoy, meanwhile, a song on this week's Torah reading exactly on this subject that we just discussed.
Wie mein Tate singt, wenn lernt.